Harley Quinn Season 3 wrapped up not long ago, and generally, yeah, I really liked it. The Bat family were a lot of fun, and I really loved the way that Harley and Ivy's relationship was developed and tested without the writers using it to manufacture cheap drama. And that Joker episode...
And is that an ethnic dish, or...?
It sure is ethnic. Speaking of racist...
That was... I liked Season 3, and more widely, Harley Quinn is mostly awesome. Mostly. Because there is a dark mark on this show's otherwise glowing reputation, and that's the long-running controversy around its handling of Jewish characters and culture. Because, in case you don't know, Harley's Jewish, one of a pretty small number of comic book characters to be explicitly confirmed as Jewish in text, and one of an even smaller pool of those to exist in the DC universe. Despite this, however, the show's often approached this side of its identity in less than delicate ways, to the point that a lot of Jewish viewers have spoken out against the way the show plays into anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes. But how serious are these allegations? Has this changed? Have the show's more recent installments course-corrected at all? Those are questions we'll be considering in this video, and heads up, this video is a bit of a different one to normal. You'll see what I mean by this soon enough. But first, let's get to the charges. What specifically is it about Harley Quinn that's proved so controversial? Before I lay out the charges, I just want to really stress that I'm not the guy who spotted these. I haven't made up these issues. I'm just talking about stuff that other people, Jewish people, have brought up beforehand. And there's some links in the description to articles and posts where you can see this. I just want to be extra clear about that, since in a video I made last month about that upcoming Harry Potter game, touching on the big yikes factor of the hook-nosed banker goblins revolting against the good wizards, yes, that actually looks to be a plot point in the game, in the comments a lot of people were calling me racist for acknowledging a pre-existing controversy, thinking that, I don't know, I was the first guy to read Rowling's Goblins as drawing on anti-Semitic stereotypes, or the first one to raise that point about Hogwarts legacy. But yeah, there are some parts of this show that people have issues with. In the words of Elias Rosner, writing for Multiversity Comics, with TVMA comes the opportunity to push the envelope, to indulge in transgressive, edgy, and envelope-pushing humor, and in doing so, it can often be hard to tell the difference between caricatures and stereotype, between off-color in-jokes and uncomfortable anti-Semitism. For instance, in episode 2, Harley and Ivy attend a bank-themed bar mitzvah. I'll use the words of Ariel Kaplan, writing for HeyAlma.com, to explain what's dicey here. Harley and her BFF/soon-to-be lover Poison Ivy crash the Penguin's nephew's bar mitzvah. The theme, money. The giveaway, bags of money. Drawing on boring Jewish stereotypes, shellfish is served at the religious celebration. Here's the thing, the Penguin, Oswald Chesterfield Cobblepot, isn't canonically Jewish, so the writers went out of their way to reinvent his roots as a money-hungry, hook-nosed, super-Jewish villain. What the fuck? Rosner's article for Multiversity expands on this, saying, what's more, Harley comments on none of this, not the bar mitzvah aspect, not the possible implications of Penguin at the mint, and the literal money bag gift bags, none of it. A simple joke about how he's giving Jews a bad name could have shown that this is not supposed to be indicative of anti-Semitic tropes, and instead poking fun at the over-the-top bar mitzvah and entitled prep school children of modern-day robber barons. Because that's what the Penguin is supposed to be representing here. Another big point of contention is the show's reference to Jewish lightning, an old-timey name for the idea that Jewish landlords would burn down their own properties for the insurance money.
Why not burn down the place and take the insurance? A little Jewish lightning never hurt anyone.
Fire! Brilliant!
Rosner takes issue with this scene, but not simply because this trope is included in the dialogue. No, he says, these are shitty people. The show is about shitty people, so it stands to reason that arson is totally within his wheelhouse and he would consider it to hide the bodies. But why even drag the implication of it being because he's Jewish into this? Why tie the act to that phrase at all? It's an archaic phrase nowadays anyway. He's a shitty landlord and has 6 presumably dead bodies on his hands in an apartment he probably wouldn't be able to sell if word gets out. There are other ways to get him to the thought of using the basement furnace. It doesn't even have anything to say on the subject other than being an edgy line. Moreover, it's mostly in service of the follow-up joke about these young people not knowing what the term is and thinking it's about Black Lightning's Israeli cousin. Why Israeli and not just someone Jewish? I don't know. And Harley is in that scene. It didn't trigger any responses in her. Even if she'd never heard the term before, like I hadn't, she's smart enough to put two and two together. Prime drama right there. Confront Sai about the usage and have a dialogue that takes it down and recontextualizes it within his character rather than leaving it as shorthand to be read into. Because again, Sai and everyone in this show is a terrible person. It's just that the show can't help but tie it not into the person, but to the Jewishness in the person in uncomfortable ways. Also, on this scene, it's worth noting that before this show, Sai wasn't a landlord. I'm quoting again here, so excuse my French, but Rosner asks, why the fuck did they make him a landlord? Whose fucking bright idea was it to make the only other explicitly Jewish/Jewish coded character a shitty landlord? He could have been the neighbor. He could have been a bored old man who'd escaped the nursing home like in the comics. He could have been any number of things, but they make him a landlord. And it isn't just these moments, either. People also don't love the way that when we finally do get to see a glimpse of Harley's own Jewish identity, we also get to see her parents, walking stereotypes. And given that the show's really done nothing to explore Harley's own Jewishness until this point, Rosner's article for Multiversity makes the case that the nuggets of Yiddish and snapshots of Jewish culture we see in this episode aren't even really good representation, because they're so incongruous with the show we've seen before. Rosner then points out the inconsistency that Harley's brother was cremated, which isn't really done in Jewish circles. And these stereotypical figures, her parents, they become explicitly negative figures by the episode's end. Spoiler alert, trying to kill their daughter, in her dad's case for the bounty on her head. There's other moments, too, that rang alarm bells for a number of Jewish viewers, but largely passed me by. For instance, the cremation sequence in Season 1, Episode 5, and the following Octopus Rampage. Since the show dropped, the Harley Quinn team have been made aware of these issues, and have largely defended these moments under the banner of self-deprecating humor, because the showrunners, Justin Halpern and Patrick Schumacher, are Jewish themselves. But that's a defense which doesn't seem to have won over all of the show's critics, and we're gonna get into why that is, but before we do, I'd really recommend reading the articles we've discussed in full. They're linked below, because you'll get a better picture of why the above moments have been criticized than the necessarily sort of condensed idea you'll get from this video. And another little disclaimer, I really don't hate this show. On the contrary, I am a fan. I've made videos about Harley Quinn before. My enjoyment of this project is a matter of public record. I'm stating this explicitly because a thing that sometimes happens when I make critical videos on things I like is that commenters assume I'm trying to cancel these things, that I don't like them, and that I'm trying to do a big gotcha or something. And that's rarely even remotely true. Any one piece of art, any one piece of culture is the product of countless ideas, assumptions, intentions, viewpoints, and so on, so it's kind of inevitable that a lot of the time, somewhere in the mix, an issue will crop up. Maybe major, maybe minor. Recognizing, talking about, critiquing these issues doesn't mean you don't like the thing. Nothing is perfect. Recognizing this, even in media you like, doesn't make you a fake fan or a hater. There's nothing wrong with enjoying critically. On the contrary, it's probably the healthier way to do it. And that's what we're doing here. So, a few months back, I, a Gentile, dropped a video talking a little about Jewish representation, or the lack thereof, in Marvel's film adaptations. That wasn't me trying to stick my nose in, or Gentile-splain Jewish erasure, it was the previous month's Patreon community video, which means the topic was suggested by a patron, in this case a Jewish one, and voted upon by other patrons. It won the poll, and according to the Pillar of Garbage bylaws, that means I make the video. So that's where that came from, and it was pretty well received. Like, maybe the vibe was that I didn't hit the nail directly on the head with everything in that video, but that it was generally a solid take, and it was good that I was trying to shine a light on this kind of thing. A few people did request I make a video talking about the controversial Jewish aspects of Harley Quinn I referenced in that video, and that's why I'm making this. One criticism that did pop up a few times, though, was that if I was going to try and talk about this, I should probably do so in a way that privileges and platforms Jewish voices and creators, in a more explicit way than just reading and citing articles. And you know what? That's bang on. I probably should have tried to do that. Now that was back in my one video every 3 days era, and that one in particular was already delayed by weeks, so I'm not going to beat myself up too much about not doing this back then, just because of the logistical pressure I made that video under, but this one? in a sense, the follow-up? Well, I've had a lot longer to plan this out, to think about what I could do better this time, and whose perspective better to platform than the very patron who suggested that original video, Adam Myers. Because Adam is also a creator, primarily on Twitch, so I thought a good way to explore the topic of Harley Quinn's Jewishness would be to get Adam on board. I took another look at the accusations, the controversies, and the show itself, and I came up with a bunch of questions. The sort of questions that for a normal video I'd pose to myself and think through in order to guide an argument, a script, through its development. But this time, instead of doing that, instead of trying to answer these questions myself, I posed them to Adam across the course of a very interesting conversation. And this is how that went. So before we get into the specifics, let's start off with just the broadest question possible. Is Harley Quinn anti-Semitic? What do you think?
Yeah. Particularly in the first season.
It's a pretty clean yes from your perspective then.
Yeah, particularly in the first season. It's gotten less atrocious, but it still has almost none of Harley's actual Judaism in it. So it hasn't exactly done anything to counter any of the anti-Semitic stuff that happened in season 1.
With perhaps some caveats, but mostly a yes.
Mostly a yes. I mean, I haven't, they haven't done anything, they were anti-Semitic in season 1, and they haven't done anything to deal with that since.
The next thing I was going to ask is, when we were chatting about this idea on the Discord server, like back in August-ish, I think you mentioned at one point that you hadn't really picked up on some of the show's Jewish elements, positive or negative, when you'd first watched it, and that feels worth bringing up. So would you say with a project like Harley Quinn, if a Jewish person can watch it and not even pick up on some of that stuff, that's a clear indication that there isn't enough representation or consideration of the character's cultural background?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, if a character identifies in a certain way and is a form of representation for that group, anyone should be able to pick up on the fact that they are a piece of representation, that they do represent that group. Otherwise, it's not really representation. You have to be able to actually acknowledge and read that, oh, Harley is Jewish. I'm watching a show about a Jewish character. Otherwise, it's not Jewish representation.
Right. I guess that's kind of similar to when some people talk about queer baiting. It's like stuff that maybe queer viewers latch onto themselves, but most people wouldn't see.
Exactly. It has to be explicit, and it has to be something you can't edit out if you feel like it. And in terms of the more anti-Semitic stuff, the main reason I didn't pick up on that was because I'm only really recently getting in touch with my Jewish roots. So like a Jew that has been more involved in the Jewish community might have been able to pick up on that stuff sooner. But what is true, absolutely, is that I don't think anyone would learn that Harley is Jewish through this show. So if you were Jewish and you were more aware of those anti-Semitic things, you would pick up on those. So they would get through to anyone. The anti-Semitic stuff would get through to anyone. But any actual positivity in terms of Harley's Jewish identity, very few people would, if any, would learn Harley is Jewish through this show.
Yeah, like there are maybe a couple of moments, but they're not dwelt on at all, and they're not really emphasized, and you would probably just miss them if you weren't paying attention for it. How do you feel about the idea that there's a balance to strike between, in multiversitycomics.com's words, making X a part of a character and making a character X? Is the controversy around Harley Quinn's Jewishness in part due to the team undershooting this balance?
So I think absolutely there is a balance to strike. You don't want a character to be known solely as the Jewish superhero or the Jewish character. In the same way, you don't want people to think, oh, that's the gay superhero, or that's whatever. Like it becomes tokenistic, and it's just not what it's like in reality. Everyone's a multifaceted person, and a good character is also multifaceted in the same way. However, and this doesn't just happen with Jewish representation, but with a lot of representation, I often see that sentiment of, oh, this is a part of the character, but it's not the whole character, used as an excuse to not really do the representation in any meaningful way. And if we are looking at Harley Quinn through this lens and saying, oh, they were just trying to not make it her entire character, which I don't know if that was the reasoning, but if that's the lens we're looking through, then absolutely they would have gone too far in the other direction of, we didn't want to make her Judaism her whole character, so we're basically just not going to include it, except things that, again, you would miss if you weren't looking for them.
Yeah, and I guess on that point, it bears mentioning that a lot of the moments which have been criticized as seeming anti-Semitic, they're not even specifically to do with Harley, some of them. Like, you've got the Penguin stuff, the Cyborgman stuff with the Jewish lightning, and there's a lot of negativity in the show more widely, or negative portrayals perhaps. Maybe a way to offset that a little would have been to be more direct with Harley's Jewishness herself, which we see very little of.
Absolutely. The one part of the show that really does, it kind of confirms her Judaism, but it struggles to, is with her parents.
Right, the episode Bensonhurst, yeah.
Yeah, and that is explicitly negative. I mean, her mother is a Jewish mother stereotype, just, to a T. And, her father is a greedy, money-hungry dick, Like, there is no good Jewish representation there. It's all stereotypes and harmful stereotypes and, just general negativity. It has nothing to do with actually depicting Harley's Judaism in any meaningful way.
So what do you think of the self-deprecating humor reasoning that Justin Halpern and others have given? And if you don't buy into it, is your issue with this conceptually, or how they actually did it in the show?
So self-deprecating humor is actually a big part of Jewish culture, believe it or not. There's a specific kind of Jewish humor that people like Mel Brooks employed, and is also actually present in characters like Peter Parker, which helps him feel Jewish to people who read the comics. To Jewish people who read the comics, that is. But this really wasn't self-deprecating humor. This wasn't, let's kind of make fun of ourselves. This is because they took this on stereotypes, right? Like, if Jews actually were money hungry and, and all that, and actually were crooked-nosed and hunchbacked, maybe the whole thing with the Penguin would have been self-deprecating. But that's not true. And the Jewish lightning, right, is also not true. That stuff isn't part of being Jewish. It's stereotypes that were created around us. So they're inherently just not self-deprecating because that's not who we are. I have been sort of thinking a lot about self-deprecating humor lately, and I think that self-deprecation actually is something we should be thinking more about, because you can actually start to believe it if it happens often enough. But some lighthearted ribbing is not bad. It's not bad at all. This isn't self-deprecation. This isn't making fun of Jews and our neurotic guilt, and that those things are a part of our culture. Is lots of guilt, lots of worry and stuff like that. Those are parts of our culture. If you want to make fun of that, those are things you can actually make fun of, because they are worth making fun of, kind of. But you're taking elements that are not part of our culture and have been assigned to us in harmful ways, and then defending them as self-deprecation, even though they're not part of our culture. And I do think that, something that is worth thinking about is that these writers probably grew up in a time where they didn't have to deal with anti-Semitism in a way that would make them think about this more, including me. I grew up in a time where I didn't have to think about that, where I didn't have to think of Jews as people who could be discriminated against, who could be subject to that kind of thing. So I didn't, read the goblins in Harry Potter as, something really harmful. It just didn't feel like it hurt me in any way because I just wasn't aware of what that meant to Jews. And I think that it's quite likely that, a lot of Jews who are working on, TV shows right now, and in particularly superhero stuff, they didn't grow up in a heavily anti-Semitic culture the same way maybe their fathers and grandfathers did, their parents and grandparents did. So I think that it's quite possible that there is no maliciousness, I don't think. I wouldn't think there was, but I think they just don't get it.
Do you think this is a more of a visible issue that you and others are perceiving nowadays with things like Harley Quinn and those damn goblins? Because anti-Semitism is on the rise compared to, say, 10, 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There is a tremendous rise in anti-Semitism, and it is not getting enough focus.
I mean, at the risk of commenters yelling at me for getting political, we should probably point out that Italy just elected a far-right president who gave a speech warning about the dangers of the financial speculators.
Really? Wow.
Yep, and avowed when she was younger I think she self-identified as a fascist.
Yeah, no, that's not great.
No, not great.
But, here in America, the far right is, essentially, going by the Nazi playbook. And obviously, if the Nazis were famous for one thing, it was probably anti-Semitism. And also Jews in our culture have a lot of, there's a lot of focus on social justice and stuff. There's something called a tikkun olam. And tikkun olam means repairing the world. It's just something that is part of our culture, is helping others and all that stuff. And that's not really something that is going to mesh with what some people in America want right now.
To put it mildly, yeah.
Yeah, to put it very mildly.
All right, let's probably get off such horrible, horrible topics just for a moment. This is sort of a follow-up question to that last point. Do you think a reason that this self-deprecation fails is that the show otherwise downplays its Jewish identity when compared to other successfully self-deprecating Jewish comedies? That is, does self-deprecating Jewish humor fit better in properties which are louder and more positive with their Judaism?
Absolutely. I think this is the case for any kind of representation. If you want to make some lighthearted jabs at the culture you're part of, it shouldn't be the only part of your culture that is represented in the story. If a culture is just in your story to be made fun of, that's not representation. That's not authentically including the thing. It's just the butt of the joke. Looking at Peter Parker as someone who represents Jewish culture, he has, the neurotic, guilt-ridden side. He also has the, drive to learn and the drive to help. So he represents parts of Jewish culture that can be made fun of a bit. And also parts of Jewish culture that we can be really proud of.
Yeah, and I guess, just mine is a far more limited perspective, of course, but I do get the sense that if Harley Quinn had been a little bit more outright with Harley's Jewishness and a bit more positive rather than just these constant sort of jokes, self-deprecating or not, then maybe the idea that I think some of the creators have given, that they're trying to sort of take the power away from some of these negative stereotypes, might have landed a bit better.
Yeah, you could have had Harley say something like, when she's, at the bar mitzvah in episode 2, you're giving Jews a bad name. Just some simple stuff like that.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be big.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be big. Just have Harley being like, hey, you are feeding stereotypes that we don't need. In the bar mitzvah, she's tied up or whatever, and have her just comment on that. It's not hard. It's not hard.
Most of the controversy was around moments from Season 1. What do you think of these angles with regard to Seasons 2 and 3? Have they course-corrected?
So, there isn't as much blatant anti-Semitism. I would not call it course correction, because they haven't started doing anything positive.
So maybe easing off rather than course correcting.
Yeah, there hasn't been as much blatant anti-Semitism, which is good.
It's always good, yeah.
It's obviously good, but it's not enough, because you haven't done anything to actually counter the harm you did it back in season 1. There are still some moments that aren't great, like in season 3. There was an episode where Harley went into Bruce's mind, and she saw, a past version of herself with a past version of the Joker, and she was, her accent was, the classic Harley Quinn accent, and and she basically said to her past self, man, that accent is too much. Get some self-respect.
Mr. J likes it, whatever he likes, I like. Ugh, and the accent, oh my god, so heavy. Girl, ease it down.
But the thing is that accent was a specific choice by the original voice actor, because she knew that the character was Jewish. So she's still, there is still this thing of like, oh, there's this character that has sounded Jewish, and she's saying to that past self, get some self-respect. Don't sound as Jewish, essentially, is what it sounds like.
To be charitable to the writers, I guess what they were going for there is maybe this version of Harley sees that accent as an affectation she played up for the Joker's benefit, and this is part of the sort of feminist reclamation narrative. But like, even if that's true, they should have thought of this. They should have realized that it isn't just that, and that it is obviously an affectation which originally was part of the less negative Jewish coding of the character.
Absolutely, 100%.
There is an article from Hey Alma, which I'll throw on screen now, and which I believe you've read, and it ends by noting some positive moments in Season 2, when the show seems to embrace the heritage a little more, and do these, I guess this is sort of what we've just talked about, but do these rehabilitate the show, or are they too little too late hollow gestures?
Yeah, we did sort of just talk about that. They're absolutely too little too late. I mean, there's like, I think the two that they mention are Harley like holding a menorah at one point.
Yeah, that's one of them.
Which is like, that's nothing. That's nothing. Any character can hold a menorah. It doesn't imply them to be Jewish. Like, that's nothing. And and on top of that, Hanukkah is not like a super important religion. Like, it is definitely not one of our, biggest religions. And I mentioned this to you when you talked about the Ben Grimm's Judaism, and how there was there was a menorah in the background. And I talked about how there is kind of this idea that Hanukkah is the Jewish Christmas, and that's just completely false. It does not hold the same thing in our culture as Christmas does to Christians. And so making the menorah sort of the symbol of Jews is not helpful, really. I guess it's fine for shorthand, but it shouldn't be the end of the representation. It's just not enough, because it doesn't really, like, we have a lot of stuff with candles, but it's not all the menorah. I think the other one they mentioned was that, Sai mentioned he had like the oil of the Maccabees or something in his veins or something.
Thousands of years ago, my people, the Maccabees, prayed for oil to last when they needed it most. That very same oil runs through my veins today.
Which, first of all, does actually tie him back to Hanukkah. And second of all, again, is just so small. It's one line. You can cut it out. Sai is already a Jewish stereotype that's been involved with some of the anti-Semitic stuff that they've done. And it's not enough. It's not enough, and I would barely even call it positive, because it's so little.
The last main thing I wanted to ask was multiversitycomics.com suggests this isn't conscious anti-Semitism, but a failure to consider the ramifications of the show's decisions. And since that controversial first season, do you feel that Harley Quinn has started to do this any better, to become more conscious of the weight the Jewish side of the show and the character has?
First of all, I want to stress that I don't think it's conscious. I do not think there is any maliciousness within these decisions. I do not think the writers are being consciously anti-Semitic. So I want to get that out of the way. However, I do not feel that the show, I guess, has it gotten any better? Yes. Like I said earlier, there is less blatant anti-Semitism in season 2 and season 3, which, again, as I said, is good. It is, however, because I do think that this is unconscious, I don't know if that less blatant anti-Semitism is because they realized they were doing anything wrong, or whether it's just that, I mean, they did get called out on it, so maybe they did think about it a little bit, and I'd like to give them that credit. I don't know for sure. Maybe there's a bit more consciousness of it. I'd say that that's probably where I am. It's just that they've done absolutely nothing to course correct. Like, they've stopped being anti-Semitic, but they haven't done anything to actually address their anti-Semitism. So, you know, Harley's still very much not Jewish. She represents none of that. Cy Borgman, one of the only really prominent Jewish characters, is in the show far less in things like season 3. And so they haven't addressed any of the stuff that they already did. So it's hard for me to say that they're actually trying to do anything about it, because there has been no awareness within the show of the anti-Semitism spread in season 1.
The last thing I was going to ask is just, do you have any extra other comments or thoughts that you'd like to add to this discussion before we end?
Yeah, I don't know. I just think that Harley Quinn is symptomatic of a larger problem. It is, and you've covered some of this in your other videos. It is a larger problem of Jews not being considered a legitimate minority that can be targeted the way any other minority can be, and not addressing the implications of that. Harley Quinn is very much one instance of a wider problem, and it's a problem that is not getting enough focus because of the problem. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I guess I just want to bring that up because this is a great discussion about Harley Quinn, but I think it's really important to note that it's a wider issue, and in particular, it's very wide today because there is this rise of anti-Semitism at the same time as superheroes. The superhero medium was built by Jews, you know.
Yeah, it's intrinsically Jewish.
Absolutely. You know, our values in Jewish culture are what made a lot of these characters heroes. You know, like that was the initial sort of idea of heroes, you know, was that they embodied Jewish values of helping. And superheroes are today more popular than ever in history, and we're not part of that conversation. Like, people aren't like going to see, you know, the new Avengers film and thinking about how Jews helped build it. Like, that's not part of the conversation, and that's really kind of heartbreaking that superheroes are more popular today than ever at the same time as anti-Semitism is rising, and the fact that we help build the very concept of superheroes is somehow completely absent. So people are loving superheroes, but not loving Jews at the same time as anti-Semitism is rising. And that's really frustrating.
Right, and it doesn't even have to be that the Avengers 5 has a subplot about the impact Jewish people had on the culture, or even a nod to that. It just has to be that these adaptations stop ignoring the stuff that's already there.
Exactly. I mean, Captain America, he's a World War II character, and there's that famous cover of him punching Hitler in the jaw that came out before America was actually involved in World War II. And again, Captain America was created by Jews, and it was a way that they could feel some kind of power, and it helped push America in a direction of doing something about the Nazis. And for Captain America in the MCU, Hydra is just kind of a generic evil, and and Steve has no Judaism in him whatsoever, really. He was probably the best character to embody Jewish values in the MCU, because he was introduced during World War II, but we don't see him dealing with any of that. And I would say that the solo Spider-Man films do a little bit more of that, but they still struggle a lot. I think they still struggle a lot, because they are integrated into this wider universe that doesn't include Jewish value a lot. It kind of gets overshadowed.
Thank you very much for talking to me about this. And yeah, do you want to tell the people watching where they can find you?
Yeah, sure. So I am on Twitter, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Instagram, and probably my biggest platform right now, or the place I spend a lot more time at, is Twitch, where I play non-violent video games, which I define as games that reward the player for intellectual and or emotional engagement rather than for combat or any other kind of violent accomplishments, so that I can really show the world that video games are a medium like anything else that can provide art. And that's been a really exciting journey for me, and I hope to see people there.
And there should be a card on screen now with a link to that, and it will be linked in the description below as well. But thanks so much for this, Adam, and I hope you have a nice afternoon, I guess, over there.
Well, I am so honored to be able to help you with this. It's an important topic that I am so thankful for you to be drawing attention to. It's extremely meaningful, and I can't wait to see the future of your channel, because you do such great work.
Before we continue with the last part of the video, I'd just like to make something explicit. This is a perspective. The point of this video isn't for me to be all like, I've got an issue with Harley Quinn, and I'm backing myself up with the Jewish voice to give myself the illusion of authority. Moreover, Adam isn't trying to speak for all Jewish people here, obviously, but he is speaking as a Jewish person, sharing his perspective on all this. There are plenty of Jewish viewers who don't really have an issue with this stuff, but equally, there are plenty who do, and it's important to hear why that is, because I've seen a lot of people online who haven't really understood the valid issues many Jewish people have had with the way Harley Quinn interacts with their culture, and I think hearing a well-articulated analysis of why this can be considered problematic by someone within that culture might clear some of that up. I think most of you watching will have got this, but I'm just putting it in here to try and eliminate any misunderstanding. But yeah, my conversation with Adam was a very interesting one. With regard to its engagement with the Jewish culture and the Jewish roots of superhero media, Harley Quinn seems to have some general failings, typical of a lot of projects like these, but also a lot of unique failings. And a point Adam made very firmly, that I maybe hadn't considered before as much as I should have done, is that difference between easing off and actual course correction. If it isn't good enough, it needs to do more good to fix that, rather than doing less bad. But as Adam also raised, none of the offense seems remotely intentional. I do wonder if, partially, this lack of course correction might have been similarly unintentional. One wonders when thinking about that whole "that isn't what heroes do" controversy about a certain cut Season 3 scene, if Harley Quinn's step back from this facet of its identity wasn't a studio note, given the flack Season 1 caught for the moments we've discussed. Might even be why there's so little engagement with Harley's Jewishness to begin with. Who knows? We can't really do much more than speculate why it's like this. All we can really do is look at what is there in the episodes we ended up getting, and what it says. And in doing that, we see that there is a dark side here. One that's not really been addressed or corrected, and which kind of overshadows the show's charm, emotion, and comedy. Maybe Season 4 will begin to right the ship, but at this point it seems that'd be a fairly tall order. Still, for a show which managed to turn Joker into a loving stepfather and socialist mayor, and managed to have this development be the best part of his arc altogether, nothing's impossible. Before the video wraps up properly, I just want to quickly address why I've made this video in the way that I did, since one of the users who wanted me to platform Jewish voices in discussions like these also thought that I should step back entirely, take my own voice out of the mix so as not to filter Jewish issues through a Gentile perspective. I have tried to do that to a point, with the interview-type format, and with framing the initial discussion of these issues around articles written by Jewish journalists, but beyond that, in terms of the practicalities of stepping back entirely for a channel like mine, it'd be a whole can of worms. Like, I wouldn't feel right putting ads on a video that's just other people, not me, and then if I don't put ads on it, the video wouldn't get shown to as many people. That's actually a thing. YouTube tends to push monetized videos harder, and that's a whole lot of time putting together a video I wouldn't see a penny from, and I can't really afford that at present. Some channels have done this sort of thing. Shiran J. Zhao platformed a bunch of Southeast Asian voices to discuss representation in Raya and the Last Dragon, but with a channel that size and that successful, I think different things are feasible. If any Jewish creators do want to bounce off that though, and come at this from their own unfiltered perspective, then I'm more than happy to share your videos on my Twitter or through the YouTube community tab, so hopefully that's something. Anyway, I think we're about done here, but thanks for watching. Big thanks to Adam for talking to me, as well as to the rest of my Patreon supporters, especially Kevin Douglas, Ian Fifield, and Strange Folk. Sorry if my voice has sounded a bit off this video, I'm feeling slightly under the weather. But hey, also, I think I'm putting this video out on a Thursday, so if I do manage to keep to that schedule, Adam's stream's gonna be starting up in like a couple of hours, so hey, maybe click on through that link down below and give him a watch.